On tonight's Disney Channel movie, it's Spider-Man's European Vacation, when Johnny Torch reviews Spider-Man Far From Home. Well, welcome in, everybody, for our 161st Johnny Torch live broadcast. And today we're going to tackle Spider-Man Far From Home, the long-awaited sequel to Spider-Man Homecoming. This is going to be a spoiler review. I've got the chat room open, but as is usually the case when I'm doing a review, I'm not going to look at the chat until I've got the review proper out. So if you got any questions or comments about the movie that you want to talk about, I'll probably get to them in about a half an hour once I get through with my original spiel. Okay, so let me give you some non-spoiler thoughts. Just off the top of my head, if you haven't seen the movie yet, I would say go see the movie. I'm giving it a mild recommendation. I would say it's okay. It's an okay Spider-Man movie. It's not a bad Spider-Man movie, but there really isn't anything we haven't seen before, particularly in Homecoming, which I believe the narrative is pretty close to what we had in Homecoming. So if you go no further and just want the mildest of recommendations, go and see it. Check out the spoiler review that we're doing now after you've seen it. Mysterio was good. I enjoyed that. Tom Holland is also, very capable as Peter Parker. I don't know that I understand why people seem to think he's the best Peter Parker, or that he's somehow bringing something that no other actor has brought. I mean, this is not to bring him down in any way, shape, or form, because he's very good and he's, a talented actor, and I take nothing away from him, but I don't really understand the way that the MCU fans seem to herald him as this great performance of Peter Parker that nobody else has done. They clearly haven't seen Tobey Maguire in the Raimi films. I personally am not a fan of Garfield's portrayal of Peter Parker. I know he has his fans as well. And again, this is nothing against him personally. I'm sure he's a fine actor. I don't think I've seen him do anything besides the Spider-Man movies he was in, but from all I can tell, he's a fine actor. But um, there you have it. So from here on, spoilers. I'm going to take a couple seconds here, though, to ask you to hit that like button, hit that share button, and subscribe if you haven't yet. We are trying to get to 100 subscribers by the end of the year, and we're halfway through. So please take the time, especially if you like anything you are hearing today or in our other broadcasts, as we do a live show pretty much every Saturday. Be sure to hit that like button, share, tell people that you like it, and subscribe if you haven't. Very hot July afternoon here, so if I'm going to sip the H2O every once in a while, I beg your pardon. Okay, so let's see where to begin. Yes, Spider-Man Far From Home, the long-awaited first appearance of Mysterio. Let's talk about him for a second. I think if we're going to go by the pluses and the minuses, let's go by the pluses first. I think Mysterio was realized very well. The costume was excellent. Jake Gyllenhaal was a great choice. He brought a lot of, a lot of energy to the role. He, of course, if you don't know, was the man that was going to be Spider-Man at one point when Tobey Maguire had a back injury before Spider-Man 2. There was some rumors that he would take his place. I don't think they were really serious rumors, but that's what was going on at the time. And eventually we come to find that, much like the comic, Mysterio is introduced as a hero, that he's trying to help, Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. And, of course, we eventually learn that he is, of course, a villain. That's not really a spoiler if you've watched any form of Spider-Man media, whether it be comics or cartoons or anything. And, of course, Spider-Man needs to take him out in the last act. But I thought he was very well portrayed. We got that storyline where he was pretending to be a hero at first. He's in the comics, he's a special effects wizard in the classic sense, sort of the smoke and mirrors guy and this and that. They updated it a little more for modern times where he is more of a, sort of a CGI specialist. It reminded me of Mirror Master in the original Flash TV show, where he has these high tech holographic images where he throws these little machines out that spit out this big, massive CGI display that fools people into thinking that something dangerous is happening when it really isn't. And Mysterio, confronts these images and defeats them to make himself look heroic. So I thought that was all done very well. I think the other pluses. I want to tackle the story sequentially, though. So let's. There isn't there isn't a whole lot more to talk about with the pluses, but I do think, as I said before, Tom Holland is a good and capable Spider-Man. Peter Parker, he's a good actor, and he brought a lot of emotion to the role. Of course, he's mourning the death of Tony Stark, Iron Man, and you do get to feel, I think, to an extent, his loss. Some people are saying the tone is off, where he's at times, joyous, and then other times he's, mourning. But I think that's such his life. I don't really think you can have if you had a film with him mourning constantly, it would be a total downer. And that would be something like The Amazing Spider-Man, that film, which I totally didn't like. So let's get the cat out of the bag here right away. Let me establish some background. As I said, I wasn't a big fan of Garfield's Spider-Man. I think The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was a step in the right direction, but I wasn't crazy about the Garfield years, the web films. Big fan of the Raimi films, even Spider-Man 3, which I'm thankful to say is starting to get a little bit more respect in recent times. People are starting to realize, at least, that it's not a disaster, if not a flawed film. And Homecoming was a difficult fish to name. It felt like, to me, it was very derivative of the previous Sony films. In that the Vulture, which of course Michael Keaton's a great actor, and I think and any other actor in that role would probably not bring much life to that character or to the film. But Michael Keaton managed to elevate it a little bit, but it was basically on the same principle as what we'd seen before with the Green Goblin, where we have, a villain that's a father to one of Peter's friends that sort of becomes a problem. Peter has to take him out, kind of is emotionally conflicted about doing so. In comparison, I think Far From Home is, marginally different. It's not quite as derivative, although I think we have some of the same beats here. We'll get to that in a second, but I think if you were to compare this to Homecoming, I would say this one comes out a little bit better. I would prefer this one a little bit more, perhaps also because Mysterio is realized a little bit better, because there's a little bit more to work with Mysterio. Vulture basically is one of those bank robber villains where it's just a guy with a gimmick. He wants money. In the case of Mysterio, they did manage to set him up as sort of a legacy threat that goes back to Tony Stark, which, again, I'm getting all over the place here, but I'm not sure that I want to see any more Tony Stark references. But in fairness, this is under the category of things I liked. I like that this feels like the perfect epilogue of the MCU at large over the past 11 years, and the Thanos saga, if you were to call it that, the Endgame saga. It feels like it bookends the MCU at this point, and we can, obviously it's not going anywhere. The MCU, we can go on from here, and we still have, Guardians 3, Black Panther 2. We've got a lot of places to go, but this does feel like the proper bookending moment. And I like that they managed to still call in some Easter eggs from Iron Man 1. We had the guy, I think he was the kid from A Christmas Story, all grown up. The guy that Obadiah Stane basically threatens because he can't duplicate the Tony Stark armor, and we have him brought in, and we tie Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, to the Civil War technology that Tony was using. All very neatly, intricately woven in stuff. It didn't really feel like they were pulling something out of thin air and trying to just like sandwich it into the storyline. It did feel very cohesive that they pulled all this together. Like I said, on the other hand, I want this to be the last time, though. If you look back over the course of these 11 years, how many times has it been sort of a Tony Stark screw up that precipitates whatever events are? I mean, think of it, especially in his own, solo films, of course, Obadiah Stane being sort of his dark opposite. Then we have, it was more of Tony's father, I guess, in Iron Man 2, but then we've got Tony, creating his own demons in Iron Man 3 that come back to haunt him. We've got his failed attempt in Avengers Age of Ultron with Ultron that goes awry. Civil War, of course, basically pits him because of his choice against the rest of the Avengers. So, it feels very much like a note played out at this point, but I think they managed to sound the piccolo one more time, so to speak. I think this is a proper way to end that whole saga. So again, a plus and a minus. I mean, I think it worked. I think it's a plus, but I think also this is the last I need to hear of Tony's enemies coming home to roost. I think we've played that out. But it works here. It works very effectively. Some of the things I didn't like about Homecoming and the MCU version of Spider-Man, of course, I've mentioned this before, but this film doesn't do anything that if you didn't like Homecoming or the MCU Spider-Man, that you will like it. I don't want to say it doubles down on it, because it basically is just the natural progression of what came before, but they do nothing to really endear this situation uh, any further. To wit, I think it's basically the exact same story of Peter, sort of being lovelorn, and in the first movie it was with Liz, and in this movie it's with MJ, which of course we'll touch on Zendaya briefly now. Of course, this is sort of their version of Mary Jane, a race-changed version of Mary Jane, which, as you know, I've gone on record several times. You don't have to look far to see I disapprove of them doing that. Although there is a report that I seen out on Twitter today from someone that I barely seen this like an hour before broadcasting, so I don't really have the particulars. But they're trying to say, and I forgot to put the image up for you, so I know we're like 10 minutes into the broadcast, but oh yeah, here's your image for Spider-Man Far From Home. But the report is about the fact that Sony still holds rights issues over the head of Disney, where Sony is not going to allow, and again, this is purely speculative. I'm just saying something that I read an hour ago without doing any research on it. I'll probably bring this up again on Saturday's live show. But Sony holds a lot of these characters over the head of Disney, where Disney cannot just use them because they want to. For example, if Sony does not allow Disney to use the redhead, freckle-faced, white Mary Jane, then Disney has to come up with another character as an analog. If Disney does not let, if Sony does not let Disney have the elderly Aunt May, then Disney has to come up with hot Aunt May. Something to that effect. Now, I don't know how true or false that is, but that may explain a lot with this franchise and why these characters are so different. So yes, so we've got the Mary Jane, the MJ stuff with Zendaya, which again, as you'll see, I think many times during this review, I'm going to say it's a plus and a minus. On the one hand, it feels like we're basically redoing the first film, at least to me anyway. It felt very much like, well, we've got Peter pining away for an attractive classmate that he eventually doesn't have to work very hard to get hold of. I mean, he winds up with her in both cases. And, the ending, of course, is different in both cases. He doesn't wind up with Liz permanently. And, apparently, from as far as we can see, he's going to wind up with MJ. But it feels like a retread, but at the same time, it does seem to focus on a storyline that is kind of typical of Spider-Man in the comics, and in all other forms of media, where he is sort of the lovelorn character that's always sort of pining away for a girl, be it Betty Brant, Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane. It's something that's identifiable with the character. It's recognizable, so I kind of can welcome it on that basis. It's also kind of interesting. I mean, it does feel kind of genuine, where the film starts with him sort of making plans for MJ, and it's like, oh, we're gonna go here, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna give her this, and then she's gonna kiss me, and it's like, in a way, I think we've all kind of been there at 15 years old or whatever Peter's supposed to be, and it never works out that way. At least in my experience, it never did. And it doesn't really work out that way for him. But of course, this being fictional, it's not as boring a storyline as it turned out to be, in my personal experience, or probably many of yours as well. But so that's fine. But it feels very much, and this goes back to sort of the Disney Channelification of Spider-Man. And as I kind of tongue in cheek said, this is sort of Spider Man's European adventure from a Disney Channel nightly movie. The first half is incredibly slow while we deal with this, which, before we get into particulars there, I do have to say that something else that kind of caught me out of left field is MJ is still pretty much like she was in the previous film. And she's kind of odd. And the way we left it in Homecoming is that, yeah, maybe she's kind of odd, and she's kind of doing that to mess with Peter. And Peter really never felt anything for her before, but he's kind of awakened to it now that, maybe she's a little more than what we thought of her. But the film kind of jumps right into, well, these two dig each other, and they're really gonna be an item, and this and that. It doesn't feel earned. I think it definitely doesn't feel earned. I think they needed to. I don't know if they necessarily needed another movie to play on it, to build up this relationship, but it did kind of feel like it was just very much from the jump. They already had this established, and I didn't really think that it was quite ready for that stage yet. But anyway, so we get into the sort of the European hijinks, where it's just sort of like a Disney Channel, teenager, flick. This is where a lot of the Disney Channel series kind of have that European adventure where they go to some vacation outlet and hijinks ensue, and it feels very much like that. We have Ned being slightly less annoying this time. I'll go so far as to say I hated the character in the first film. Here he is. I don't want to say he's used better, but he does seem somewhat more effective because he's not directly tied to Spider-Man. He's basically doing his own little thing in the corner of the storyline, which is basically to deflect attention from Peter. And he has this side romance with Betty Brant, which, of course, Ned Leeds, Betty Brant in the comics were a thing, and not unexpectedly, they broke up by the end of this film because, I mean, let's face it, they're both supposed to be 15 and stuff. I didn't really kind of expect them to stay together. But so Ned, yeah, I would say Ned was a little bit more effective in this film. As far as the other kids, most of them were sort of nondescript and didn't really even have a name. But let's talk about Flash Thompson for a minute there. I think Flash. was also used slightly better here. He was more annoying in the first film. Here, he's just sort of like, he's basically meant to be like the annoying member of the party. He's like, he's always got something, derogatory to say to Peter, and they didn't sort of beat that into the ground the way they did in the first film. But then we have Brad, who I believe pretty much stole Flash's role. I think in a previous iteration of this film, that they weren't trying so hard to distance themselves from recognizable attributes of these characters, he would have been sort of the hunky jock that was pursuing MJ. Instead, he's sort of like a cyber nerd here. But they kind of took what I felt was a role that probably would have went to Flash and just established it with this Brad character. So that was kind of odd. And some of the humor, quite honestly, didn't work too well for me. The plot has Peter getting Tony's last gift, which is a pair of sunglasses. I think supposedly the sunglasses he wore in Civil War, which, again, in true MacGuffin status, I don't really know what that did. It was just basically the same thing as the AI he had in his suit, except I guess turned up to the umpteenth power. And it's basically a MacGuffin, just to say that Tony gave it to Peter, and Peter ends up sort of not wanting this gift, or not feeling worthy of this gift. That seems to be his storyline through this whole thing, where he he sort of just wants to pursue MJ. So he uses it to, in a scene where he's like caught with his trousers off, and it's a very complex scene where he's trying to get the photo out of the camera of the guy that took it. And again, it just feels like kind of sophomoric humor, which again was much worse in Homecoming. So I think if anything, maybe they toned it down actually. But again, the humor didn't really work too much in that instance. Again, going back to now, let's talk for a minute. I was happy to see Happy Hogan return, and we got Aunt May back. And again, talking about things that felt like they needed time. When last we left Aunt May, she just found out that he was Spider-Man. Peter was Spider-Man. And again, there is like no progress to show us how she came to terms with this. Not even a line of dialogue. We get to see in some humorous fashion that how the world carried on after what they called the blip, which is Thanos' snap. And that was kind of funny. The film opens with the in memoriam to the Avengers. That was kind of funny. And again, it didn't really. It doesn't feel like Aunt May. This version of Aunt May does not feel like Aunt May. Even in Homecoming, they did give a throwaway line of dialogue to, what's May gonna do when she finds out, she won't be able to handle it and this and that. And of course, come to find out, she handles it pretty fine. She kind of uses Spidey to shill for her philanthropist club or whatever it is, where she's trying to raise funds. She doesn't have much to do in this film, so it's not really a big issue. But again, kind of a missed opportunity there. I don't really know what they were going for there. They got kind of a relationship going between Happy and May, which is kind of a non relationship, but it's sort of like also grist for the humor mill. Again, Jon Favreau, I always love seeing him as Happy. I enjoy all of his appearances, and he did a great job here as sort of being the moral rearmament of Peter. Before we get into some of the ultra heroics here, I gotta point out and say that I think the first half, as I said, as I was leading up to, was very slow and boring, and mostly a superhero less first act. We get Peter in the Iron Spider suit, which the commercials and trailers completely misled you thinking he was wearing the actual Spider-Man suit. It was the Iron Spider suit. They completely removed a scene that was in the trailer of Spidey in action in the Iron spider suit where he's joking with the cops, I'm doing your job or whatever. That's not in the film at all. And the film suffers for it because one of my criticisms of Spider-Man 2, which is wildly heralded as the greatest Spider-Man film of all time, is that I don't think there is enough Spider-Man suit scenes and there's not enough quips. And I think this film is even more lacking than Spider-Man 2 in that department. By taking away that one scene that basically had all the quips and would have started off the film in a, an action scene, in true fashion of superhero films. Whenever you get like at least a sequel, you always start off with a good action scene for the hero. I mean, I'm thinking Superman 2 with the elevator rescue, um, the Dark Knight where Batman takes out the Scarecrow. You basically have to start the movie with some kind of reminder that, yeah, the hero is back and he's in action. We didn't get that here, and there is, again, maybe a cameo of Spidey in the costume, but really no superhero heroics for the first half. Now, when Mysterio's imaginary creatures are wreaking havoc, Peter tries to, prevent damage and calamity by wearing like a jester's mask and helping from the sidelines. And then we get him in the black costume, which really is not very Spider-Man looking. And even if you want to say, well, he's still Spider-Man, he really wasn't very effective there either. Just basically, again, preventing damage, trying to save a few lives, but not really doing very much. I think that was one of the times when the humor did work was when Ned called him the Night Monkey as a sort of Spider-Man ripoff for I forget where they were, in Europe somewhere, and Betty's like calling him Night Monkey. That was pretty funny. But again, so it really didn't look like the Spider-Man costume. So you're waiting basically half the film to see Spider-Man in costume and to see him do something in costume, or at least in a recognizable costume, which I think is well, downright unforgivable, really. I mean, like I said, comparing it with Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man wears the costume to deliver the pizzas. He stops like bank robbers in the suit for like literally 10 seconds. He pulls the plug on Otto's machine, which again is another 30-second, 90-second scene. I'm not sure, but basically you need Spider-Man to do something heroic in the first half of the movie, because although he's going to do something in the second half, you are still making the audience wait on whenever Spider-Man finally decides to do something. All right, so that's one of the negatives, but I do have another positive here, which I think again is a positive and a negative, because this is very much a film that is equally positive and negative in almost all its aspects, in almost all respects. Now, I do believe firmly that they at least tried to get the message of the famous Spider-Man message, with great power comes great responsibility, out. Now, of course, one of the main gripes that I have and a lot of Spider-Man fans have is that Uncle Ben is never mentioned in any of the in any of the MCU films. So it basically all continues to keep boiling down to Iron Man, Iron Man, Iron Man, Tony Stark, Tony Stark, Tony Stark. So Tony Stark has become the MCU's Uncle Ben. And his every waking moment of trying to find it within himself to be worthy to be Spider-Man comes from his trying to please the memory of Tony Stark. I'm thinking this is sort of like the MCU's Spider-Man 2, where you have Peter having the vision of Uncle Ben and saying, I really don't want this. I want a life of my own. I want to do what makes me happy. And I can see very clearly that they sort of took that template of Peter gives the glasses to Mysterio. And people would say, yeah, that's kind of a dopey thing to do because he's just met him like twice. He's known him for a full 10 minutes, and he kind of just gives off the responsibility. But that is kind of in Spider-Man's wheelhouse. He has to learn with great power comes great responsibility. The message doesn't come through quite clearly enough, though. You have to dig for that message because, at the core, Spider-Man originally was a very selfish character. Peter was a very selfish person. He didn't want to be a superhero. He wanted fame and glory and, money and girls and this and that. But when it came down to it and he failed his Uncle Ben, he realized with great power comes great responsibility. In the same way here, he doesn't want to fail Tony Stark, but at the same time, he still wants to chase the girl and he still wants to push off his responsibilities on Mysterio. In other words, it was a underlying storyline that was worthy of Spider-Man, but I don't think it was handled well enough to really reach its potential and to give them credit for doing a very Spider-Man-esque arc in the film. Okay, so let's get to my favorite scene in the film is the one that you would expect that was literally lifted right out of the Spider-Man comics. We had Mysterio doing his illusion show, and every Mysterio issue that he's in with Spider-Man has this kind of thing where he puts him through the paces of thinking he's seeing illusions. It would be loved ones and stuff. In this case, it's Iron Man again, and Peter's like fighting against something that isn't there. It's very much he's Mysterio is very much Spider-Man's Scarecrow. What Scarecrow is to Batman, with the fears and the projecting anxieties in front of him to deal with. It's pretty much what Mysterio has always done. And that was probably the best scene because it felt like it was lifted right out of the comics. It felt like it was something that you could identify with immediately as part of Spider-Man lore. And they got him right. They got Mysterio pretty much right. And again, uh, the the final act, as again we already went over how Happy sort of gets to be his moral rearmament, so to speak. The final act also felt kind of lacking. I I realize that they have to keep changing costumes on Spider-Man. That seems to be something. It's very much like Batman, where it's like there's sort of like a toy company component where it's like we have to keep changing his costume. I mean, they do that a bit with Iron Man. They do that a bit with some of the other characters, but it really isn't noticeable. But it's like they had to give him like a red and black costume instead of the red and blue to show, oh, he's got a power upgrade. And I didn't like it. I remember when they sort of hinted that they were going to use that for I think the original Spider-Man film, the original Raimi film, was going to be red and black, and then they kind of were like, well, we don't want to tamper with a classic. But we finally got the red and black costume. So we end up getting Spider-Man fighting Mysterio's drones, which again, this to me felt pretty lacking. It reminded me of Iron Man 2's finale when it was like Iron Man versus 101,000 drones, and then his fight with um, Whiplash lasted like 10 seconds. It kind of felt the same way here because there was never going to be a fist fight between Spider-Man and Mysterio, I guess. And he isn't even in costume, which I kind of like the thing where he's wearing like a motion capture suit and he's sort of like directing things from, the bridge or whatever he was on. That was cute, but it's kind of like you want there to be like a good old-fashioned barn burner ending. And again, comparing it to Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 2, I always felt didn't have enough quips. Now, people have criticized the Raimi films especially for not enough quips, but it depends on the situation Spider-Man's in. When he's trying to save, Mary Jane and keep her from getting, you know, crushed from, a train or whatever it is, he's not going to make a lot of jokes. In Spider-Man 2, the only time he makes any jokes is when he's stopping Doc Ock in the bank robbery, because, of course, that's kind of more of a minor incident. Not many lives are at stake when he's just trying to escape with a couple of bags full of money. So I missed that Spider-Man wit. In this film, he didn't have any displays of the Spider-Man wit at all. And again, you want to criticize the Amazing Spider-Man film series, which I have no problem doing because I always thought they were lacking, but they did still kind of make use of the quippy Spider-Man. We didn't get that here at all, and I expected Spider-Man to call Mysterio fishbowl head or something at least once. I mean, remember this is sort of in the era where Deadpool says all kinds of crazy stuff, and Spider-Man is a teenager, and he's known for taking the snot out of people with his witty remarks. We really don't get any of that here, and I think at least I think it would be appropriate for him to make a couple of comments to him, at some point during this battle, and it never happens. So that was kind of underwhelming. Also disappointed that Mysterio dies supposedly. I mean, there's a lot of speculation on that from all corners, where he has the glasses on, he gets the glasses back, and as we all and sort of like a stray bullet goes off during the battle, and Mysterio is doubled over as if he's been shot, and when obviously when he's dying, I figure, it's going to be an illusion because that's what he's known for. And it is an illusion, and he's behind Spider-Man with a gun, but he still is actually shot. He's actually dying from a gunshot wound. So even though Spider-Man catches him and prevents him from killing him, he still apparently dies of his injuries. So again, I'm disappointed in that, because if they are indeed trying to build up to a Sinister Six film at some point, Mysterio is a must have. You know what I mean? I don't know. You could make do with counting a couple of them out, but I think you really need Mysterio. And so far, what do we have? We have the Vulture, we have presumably Scorpion, and we don't have Mysterio now. So now we've got like two villains that could be used. And they obviously could introduce more. Hopefully, we're going to get a MCU Green Goblin and Doc Ock at some point. Craven is being speculated for the next film, I guess, because he is sort of the last of the great Spider-Man villains not to be used. We don't have Chameleon yet either, and I remember there being speculation that the Shield agent that is sort of the I don't know, sort of the emissary of Nick Fury during this film could turn out to be the Chameleon, although there's no evidence of it in this film. So yeah, again, a very wasted death if this death is indeed allowed to take. But again, we'll talk a little bit more about the future of the MCU Spider-Man in just a moment. Uh, let's see. I have a feeling I'm forgetting something that I'm going to want to talk about in a second, and I can't remember. All right, so let's talk about. Let's see Let's see. They introduced the Shocker, right? And he was never given a full costume either, unless they're going to try to build him up into something after the fact, like he ends up actually getting a good costume and stuff. Oh, that's probably what I was going to talk about. This is yet another Spider-Man film where Spider-Man, his identity is completely unmasked. I mean, it's again shocking to me that they tried to play lip service to the fact that Peter needed his secret identity and it would ruin his life if he didn't have a secret identity. But the way the MCU has played the notion of the secret identity, it's kind of hard to understand why it would be so bad when all the heroes basically, have this great adulation for them by the public at large. And it seems like, I can see the way they did it where it really wasn't Peter's choice. The Nick Fury, quote unquote Nick Fury, tells him everybody here knows who you are anyway, so you can just take the mask off. So it's basically Nick Fury's fault that Peter trusted him to take his mask off in front of Mysterio. That might be another reason why he dies. It could be an illusion, but the thing is see, he had the glasses, Peter, and the glasses said there's no more illusions. So apparently that was the actual death of Mysterio. So you would think maybe he had to die, because how many villains are going to know his secret identity? We already have the Vulture still alive and knows the secret identity. And we had MJ figuring out his secret identity, which again, this is something that they always do it with the girlfriend, and I really, that was part of the reason why the secret identity was such a prevalent thing back in the day, which was to keep the loved one safe. But at a certain point, you have to wonder, why does the girlfriend always find out then if they're keeping their identity to keep them safe? I mean, they seem to like throw that under the, under the bus every single time. So she finds out, and again, it's sort of an attempt to make her more relevant to the plot or whatever, where she's sort of helping Spider-Man now, and much like Ned, and again, Spider-Man is a character that doesn't really need sidekicks. So he's already got Ned, he's got Happy to an extent, and now he's got MJ. It's, again, it is what it is. But I don't really like this MCU Spider-Man for those reasons. I mean, they pretty much already established all this. Peter's still got Tony's AI helping him out. He's not the money crippled teenager that's basically putting things together with shoestring budget. Although I think this actually is the first film where Spider-Man says he's run out of web fluid, which was amazing. After like, I don't know, 7 films, he's actually run out of web fluid this time. But and then you also have that he's got helpers where he's usually a solo act. You've got him being, you know, his secret identity not being kept very well, which in fairness, all the Spider-Man films have done that. So it's like they really haven't, the MCU Spider-Man really hasn't exceeded where any other Spider-Man films have failed. They've done the same things. And it's kind of disappointing. All right, so let's get to the end. Let's get to the end with MJ. Apparently, he's going to wind up with MJ now for reals, for realsies, and they go for a spider web swinging affair or whatever, which would have been nice if I actually cared about these two as a couple. MJ really don't want any of it, so I don't know how far that's going to go in the future. But then they see in the mid-credit scene where Quentin Beck plays his last card, where he is, he's built up this illusion to show that Spider-Man killed him and orchestrated the attack so that Mysterio still dies looking like the good guy, and Spider-Man was the one doing the criminal acts. And this gives them a chance to, uh, you know, I was I was really happy that I didn't get this spoiled for me, even though I heard that J.K. Simmons was at the premiere. But yep, they got him back, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. And I swear, if they were gonna do like a previous cast member going back into the franchise, it had to be J.K. Simmons. I mean, the guy is great. And he still looks great as Jameson. Of course, they didn't let him wear the toupee, which I understand because, again, you don't want, this is like a multiverse thing. This is a different Spider-Man, you know what I mean? So you don't really need Simmons to look exactly the same as he did in the Raimi films. But again, really welcome to see him back, and he's beginning his crusade for, Spider-Man's a menace. And that was great. And then Mysterio reveals Peter Parker as Spider-Man in his final words. Now, I have two opinions about this. On the one hand, this looks like a setup that's better than the last two movies put together. I mean, I was more excited about the future of Spider-Man in the MCU with the next film than I was enjoying the previous two films, so they did pique my interest. They got my attention, and I'm really hoping they're going to be able to do something good with this. Now, the idea is probably, if we take this to its logical conclusion, they're going to out Peter, and he's going to be a criminal, a wanted criminal, because J. Jonah Jameson is going to continually hound him now because Mysterio died as a hero and Spider-Man's to blame. Now, I don't know how they get themselves out of that, but that does sound like a pretty compelling story to tell. Um, again, this might be just their way of kissing the secret ID goodbye and not dealing with it anymore. Because, like I said, there really is no need for it anymore. I guess. I mean, in the MCU anyway, Spider-Man is the only hero that is keeping a secret identity, and all his loved ones already know who he is. It's kind of, you know, I don't know. I don't want to say it's a concept that's unneeded because it's one of the pillars of the superhero genre is the secret identity. But they threw it out the window very early on in the MCU. I mean, particularly in the first film with Iron Man, it ends with him basically coming out as Iron Man. And no other superhero since then is really has really kept a secret identity or perhaps even needed one. Um, so it is what it is. Then we've got the last post-credit scene, the last post-credits tag, which was something that was hinted upon uh, several times that maybe the scrolls, now that they were introduced in Captain Marvel, were going to have something to do with this. I didn't want to see the Secret Invasion storyline because I really don't want to have the questions of, well, who was really a Skrull during the past 11 years and who wasn't? And of course, it's revealed that Maria Hill, Kobe Smulders, Be Still My Heart, and Nick Fury were Skrulls in this film. Now, I'm hoping at least that it was only in this film because, like I said, I don't want to have to play that game with, you know, was it after Winter Soldier that Fury became uh, a Skrull? Was it, I don't know. It's just too complicated. So I just am hoping that after he disappeared and reappeared, Nick Fury, that's when he went on this Skrull cruiser. And, apparently this is a setup to the next phase of Marvel, which is going to, it's going to be very cosmic. I think it's going to be a direct tie-in for Captain Marvel 2, which will probably be, one of the first things out in the next phase. It's probably going to tie into Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which is also a cosmic movie. We're also going to have the Eternals, which I believe is also a cosmic part of the MCU. So this is probably sort of the connective tissue that's going to get that side of the MCU in full swing. It's exciting to an extent, but they never did show what happened to Maria Hill. I need to know Kobe Smulders is all right. Come on. How could you do this to me? All right, so let's see. Wrapping it up here now. Wrapping it up. What am I going to give this film? Gee, I don't know. I kind of want to grade it on the curve because, from the midpoint on, it is pretty entertaining. Again, I don't know. I would probably give this one 3.5 stars out of 5. That's 3.5 stars out of 5, which would make it either a C plus or a B minus. Uh, I'm I'm kind of feeling generous, so I might lean to a B minus. But it's one of those things where the first time you see it, it's entertaining. I don't know how much more entertaining it's going to be on subsequent rewatches. Like I said, the first half is pretty uneventful and just your basic Disney Channel comedy. We got some cool stuff with Mysterio, and the battle at the end is kind of underwhelming. You also have, like I said, a lack of quips and stuff, so quite possibly a C plus. Again, I don't know. The MCU Spider-Man hasn't really done it for me. It hasn't struck gold yet. Like I said, I think this is a step in the right direction, and I think Spider-Man was great in Civil War, and I think he was used pretty well in most of the Infinity War saga there. Again, I just don't like having no Uncle Ben. I don't like having Iron Man be like his hero and his mentor and his revered idol and Hot Aunt May and all that stuff. It just doesn't feel like Spider-Man to me. It feels like the Disney Channelification of Spider-Man still. And part of the problem is also that I think we've just had so much Spider-Man at this point in film, and in a very short amount of time, too, you have to remember. I think what's happened to Spider-Man is what's happened to Batman, but Batman had like 20 years to go through this. It feels soulless. Like we really aren't. getting to the heart and soul of the character. Now, we get that once in a while, like with Batman, for instance. I thought Batman Forever was the first time we really got to the heart and soul of the character of Batman, who he is, why he does what he does. Batman Forever. That's the first time, and that's 1995. Then we don't see that again for like 10 years, and then 2005, we get Batman Begins, which again was strong, a good telling of the Batman story. The Dark Knight, same thing, but then it kind of went the other way. We had The Dark Knight Rises, then we got the DCEU Batman, who was a antagonistic killer, branding people, and so forth, and it didn't feel like Batman. At least now we have the hope that in a few brief years, maybe we'll get the essence of Batman right again with Matt Reeves. But with Spider-Man, he's pretty much been on a downward trajectory since the Raimi films finished. I mean, I think we had the perfect Spider-Man film in Spider-Man 2002, I think it was. Perfect Spider-Man film. Spider-Man 2, equally good. Some would say better. I would say equally good, maybe a shade less. And then Spider-Man 3, which I thought was also a great movie. Flawed, but great. Then Amazing Spider-Man, hated it. Amazing Spider-Man 2 had inspired moments. Wasn't great, had inspired moments. Homecoming, mm, didn't really appreciate it. And then Far From Home, which is basically just a marginal step above Homecoming. Probably about, I don't know, maybe a shade worse than The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 felt like they got the character of Spider-Man right. There was a lot of crap that they threw in there, such as the villains being crappy. That Green Goblin was an embarrassment. And Electro was nothing really to write home about. I mean, I wouldn't say it was an embarrassment, but it was sort of like a cheesy kind of, take on the character by making him sort of a Jerry Lewis, that got powers. But again, I think some people kind of unfairly malign The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, I could watch it again. I have no desire to watch The Amazing Spider-Man ever again. But The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I could throw it on for a lark and just, enjoy some of the quips and. So yeah, that's kind of the way I feel now. I feel like we've kind of got a clone of a clone of a clone of Spider-Man at this point. We don't have like an inspired Spider-Man anymore. We've got the clone of a clone of a clone. And each time you get diminishing returns. Like with the first film, we got with great power comes great responsibility. We had the relationship with Uncle Ben. We had Mary Jane being Mary Jane. And then in the next film, we got, Uncle Ben isn't really treated right. He's sort of a sanctimonious old so and so. And then we got Gwen Stacy sort of, it's pretty much played right, but and then we get the diminishing returns when Homecoming comes around, where it's like the brand is diluted even more. It's diluted, and now we can't mention Uncle Ben, and with great power comes great responsibility is laid so far within the margins that you kind of have to mine it out with a pick and shovel. MJ is like a goofy, you know, antisocial nerd that really has no basis of reflection on the original character of Mary Jane at all. So again, that's kind of where I feel where we are with Spider-Man now, and it's like I think we're at least a decade away from seeing Spider-Man be as great as Spider-Man could be. I don't see a happy future for Spider-Man really in the MCU. Now, I don't know if he would do better in Sony's hands, to be particularly honest, because they haven't really done him right in a good 15 years or whatever it's been. But I don't know. I really don't know how far we can go with this version of Spider-Man. All right, so let me take a look and see. Alrighty then. So that about wraps it up. If you have any comments, let me know in the comments below. And what did you think of Spider-Man Far From Home? Did you feel that it was better than Homecoming? Was it worse than Homecoming? Is it on par with the Raimi films? What did you think of Mysterio? Let me know what you think. Let me know your rankings. Let me know your rankings. I think I pretty much already said my rankings, but I'll list them this way: 1, Spider-Man; 2, Spider-Man 3; 3, Spider-Man 2; 4, The Amazing Spider-Man; 5, Far From Home; 6, Homecoming, and 7, The Amazing Spider-Man. That's the way I rank them. So let me know your rankings as well in the comments below. And thank you once again for joining me here on Johnny Torch Live, number 161. And be sure to tune in on Saturday. We'll be doing another live show. We got some news to tackle. And again, I don't know how far I can go with these shows because the Hangouts on the Air is going away in August. I don't know what kind of software I'm going to have to use and get used to, but hopefully the show won't be going anywhere anytime soon. So until next we meet, this is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon. Flip!